Thank you. Everyone hear me? I can hear me. Ooh. Okay. We'll give it 30 more seconds officially.
Test.
Yep. All right, who's local? Ah,
You.
quite a bit. Who's from outside of the United States? Who thinks they're from the furthest spot away?
Oh, there you go. Got a hand.
Ah, where?
Sydney.
Australia. Yeah, it's a long trip. I did that in December. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Heidi Restivo. I'm from Google Cloud. First of all, thank you so much for coming and for being here. And to my fellow panelists, really appreciate you being here. We are going to talk a little bit about customers and their experience working with Google Cloud. We want to make sure that it's meaningful and useful for all of you. So I'm going to start off with just a few questions. So who is here as an individual versus, or maybe a startup or an individual? Just trying to gauge what the audience is. Okay, great. Who is here as part of an enterprise company? I realize that definitions are quite, okay. Looks like most of you. And what capacity are you with? Are you technologists? Technologists? Okay, business people? Okay, great. So we've got good representation across the board. So I'll try to ask some things that kind of go across all of those different lenses. By way of introduction, I was just trying to explain my role, which is actually kind of hard to explain. So I've been with Google since we launched officially Google Enterprise, which is now Google Cloud, back in 2007 with the launch of Google Apps, which is now called G Suite. So we like to do a lot of name changes. Anybody here a G Suite user? Wonderful. Anybody here a Gmail user outside? Yeah, usually we get every hand when I ask that question. Okay, cool. So my role at the time was to help build the enterprise sales force, so essentially the team that focused on working with big companies. We segment the business essentially into SMB and then kind of the larger enterprises. And then obviously, as you know, and we'll talk about it a little bit today, we have programs for startups as well as very big focus on big companies. So over the years since I've been here, we have had a lot of expansion in our portfolio in terms of what comprises Google Cloud, and most notably in the recent years, we've been very much focused on our infrastructure and platform, which we call Google Cloud Platform, and externalizing essentially many of the things that run Google so that other people can make benefit of that technology. And so obviously in that space, we're competing with Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure primarily, and we are third. So I'll just go right out and say that. We have very definitive plans to change that landscape over the next couple of years, and we're putting a huge amount of investment into it. So thank you, welcome, really appreciate you coming. We hope that you find this useful. I will try to keep it as diverse as possible to address just the different constituents in here. So I'm gonna start off by introducing, or having you guys introduce yourselves. I'll start with you, Lyle. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your background and why you're here?
Sure. So, can we hear me? No.
Should we switch to Brian? Why don't we go with Brian while we get mic help for you?
Yeah.
Yours isn't working.
We'll do that. All right.
Great.
I'm good. Okay, good. Hi, I'm Brian Wilson. I'm the Chief Customer Officer of Xenos. We're an infrastructure monitoring and service assurance platform for the enterprise. And our company's been around 15 years. We're based here in Austin. We're roughly 50 million-ish, so and growing. But we originally were an on-prem product that large Fortune 500, Global 2000 companies would purchase to ensure their applications were up and services were running well, and when they weren't, identify the root cause. And we made the switch, so we decided to make the technology pivot to a true SaaS platform a couple years ago and chose Google Cloud after having used AWS for quite some time. And so it's cool to be here, and we love our relationship with Google and share kind of some of our learnings and what we've seen across the way.
Wonderful, thank you, Brian. How are you doing, Lyle?
I don't know.
Okay,
I haven't had any help yet.
we're going to Ryan.
We're good?
Okay.
Oh, you can't hear him? Oh, okay, I can't for some reason.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm Lyle Avery. I'm the CEO and founder of Pull Request. So we do code reviews as a service. We're actually a Google portfolio company, but I've been in startup for about 20 years now, and actually been using Google Compute Platform since 2008 with App Engine on the early
wow.
Python days.
Yeah.
So long-term fan of the platform and excited to be here as well.
Great, thank you, Lyle. Ryan.
So my name is Ryan Richard. I also work at Google, Google Cloud, and so my role is really around working with large enterprise companies and SMB companies as well, and help them adopt Google Cloud technology. That's been my primary focus for the last couple of years. I as well also spend some time on the startup side and trying to build an ecosystem here in Austin for Google Cloud for startups, which hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about.
Yeah, so maybe that's actually a great segue into, who's heard of the 20% projects at Google? Anyone? Sometimes we're known for it. It's like one of the big perks on the engineering side typically is that there's some latitude. You're still accountable for delivering, but there is some latitude to be innovative and come up with ideas. And it's probably less pervasive within the business organization, but essentially the engineers could theoretically dedicate 20% of their time to a project, and they have to have clear goals and everything, but ultimately the belief is that by doing that, innovations come out of it, and actually Gmail was a result of a 20% project. So like there are real examples of businesses being born from it. So Ryan, actually, why don't you talk for a second about your 20% project?
Oh, sure, thanks. So I didn't think it would happen that fast. Right, so Google Cloud also has a startups arm. Google actually has a startups arm. It's called Google for Startups that approaches the entire Google landscape, like ads and search and everything. And then there is a sort of a smaller arm that's Google Cloud for Startups. And what we try and do is foster an ecosystem in cities for startups and partners like accelerators and venture capitalists and that whole ecosystem. And we really want to bring startups into our world. So we obviously have like credits, like G Suite, Cloud, Maps, et cetera. But we also do things like office hours, architecture reviews. And really Austin, we're trying to cultivate that ecosystem here locally. We haven't had historically not much presence here, but we have a very large office right down on 2nd Street now, and about 1,500 Googlers in the city, and so we're really trying to make Austin one of our top cities.
Yeah, so for perspective, when I started in 2007, there were 8 of us. So that actually shows, and even honestly, just a few years ago, we were probably 300. So there's pretty exciting growth, and as a longtime advocate of the city and a belief that there's great tech talent here and not everybody has to live in the Bay Area, I'm excited to see us grow there. So wonderful. So let's start with you for a minute, Lyle, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what you think, what you see as the biggest trends in technology, and particularly those that you think are going to impact enterprises, that some enterprises might be thinking about and planning for, and some may not yet be there but know that they're coming.
There's a lot to answer there, and we should never listen to me for trend advice because I've
Wait,
missed
you've
everything.
exited startups.
Well, all right. To be fair, I think 3 South Bys ago, I tried a scooter out in front of my office and went, no one would want these. And not a great picker. But in terms of enterprise, I think there's a lot of issues that are facing startups that are starting to be felt within enterprise, particularly on the hiring and promotion management side. There's a stat right now that there's 3.8 million open dev jobs in the US. That'll keep increasing as a delta over the next few years. So things like how do we onboard, say, students that are coming from Hack Reactor and other schools into enterprise and development environments. That's obviously a challenge that we all have to face. And figuring that out and onboarding people is a big thing. Certainly the move to cloud continues. Probably our #1 segment, we review a lot of large companies' code bases. Our largest segment is cloud adoption. So we all might think that everything's on the cloud these days. It certainly feels that way, but talk to a Midwest bank and you'll see a lot of growth in that market over the next few years.
Great. Anything to add on
I'll
that?
totally
Brian?
add to that.
Yeah.
So I know Google brought us here, but there's a stat out there that talks about AWS 10 years to go from 0 to its first 10 billion.
Yep.
2 years to go for their second 10 billion to get to 20. They predict another year to get to their third 10 billion to 30 billion in revenue. And yet cloud spend in the enterprise is still single digits, roughly 7 to 9%.
Yep.
So as much as you guys are here as a technology event and you're probably on the leading edge and everything's cloud, but the enterprise is not. It's still vast majority non-cloud.
Yeah.
And the other stat that's super interesting to me, if you look at cloud adoption in the enterprise, the amount that moves back after the first year is something that is constantly being looked at by IT leaders across the spectrum. And so it's on the progress of services that we're seeing from the hyperscalers, Google in particular, makes that more and more attractive every single year. But as we deal with the enterprise, we're talking hybrid for a very long time and multi-cloud for a very long time as well. So to me, those are some of the big trends that we're going to see. Adoption for a very long time that's happening in the enterprise.
I agree. And in fact, that's part of what gives me a lot of optimism when we say we're #3 is like the low level of adoption. There's still a ton of room to catch up and surpass. So wonderful. I'm going to go back to the audience for a second. So for those of you who raised your hand when I said if you're from business, will you raise your hands again, just real quickly? How many of you feel like you have a good understanding of what the cloud brings or offers to business? Okay, I see fewer hands now. Would it be helpful to talk a little bit about that? Okay. You're up.
That's right. That's my job. I think
From a business user's perspective.
yeah, from a business user's.
Yeah.
I think it sort of depends what we're focusing on. If we were to take an example of a business that wants to increase top line growth or introduce a new product versus like efficiency and bottom line. I mean, we could talk about any of those aspects. I think if we want to be a little forward looking and look at new product growth, where I think cloud is very well positioned currently is in the ML space. Not to make everything about ML, but truly as we work with enterprises, what we're starting to see is people or developers and product managers and business analysts are starting to figure out, okay, how can I take my data that I have that I've kept back here for so long, and how can I turn that into a product, or how can I turn that into a feature of my company and sell that back to my users, right? And I think that's the big thing that we're seeing in the exploration space right now. I wouldn't say that everyone's figured it out or that really most people have figured it out. I think everybody is sort of dabbling in it, especially large enterprises. Mm-hmm. I can give you, an example of an insurance company recently that has tried to say, well, we have all this data about crashes. How can I build, some sort of machine learning algorithms to predict like the severity of a crash, right? And the whole point being that reducing time that you as like an insurance user or as a customer of theirs receives a check, right? So if they can help.
Can't they just prevent the crash
with
ML?
Yeah, hopefully. It might be a while before our
that
cars.
would be the nirvana, right?
But if I can aid an appraiser, if I can speed an appraiser's job up by 10 or 20 or 100x, through prediction and machine learning, that's real savings. And these are the types of problems that I think cloud and large enterprises are starting to think about.
Great. Lyle, did you have something to add?
As a concrete example, at Pull Request, we're a startup. We raised some money, but we're using ML now to categorize customer sentiment around code review, which means we can analyze whether a developer will actually make a change based on what a comment has been left by another developer. Building the infrastructure to do that ourselves would have been financially prohibitive for our company. So jumping on the GCP and having the ML toolkit there, it's absolutely amazing. And it changes how early a company can think about that kind of adoption of ML, actually, which is...
Yeah. How many of those, for those of you that raised your hands and said you were IT and from enterprise, do you feel like your organizations have the skill sets necessary to be successful from a development standpoint in the cloud and take advantage of it? Some? A few hands? Okay, fewer. Do you feel like, well, actually, maybe I should ask something else. How many of you are using a public cloud today? So
That's
about
interesting. So that's
half?
maybe half?
Yeah.
Less than.
How many are private cloud?
Few.
Which to me is like your mess for less from the 90s. I can say that, I'm old. Okay. Yeah, definitely interesting. Okay. I'm going to keep going. I think probably the thing that you mentioned was like newer technologies. That's the key that I heard. And then you actually talked about how that actually translates into being able to innovate and do something new that in the past would have been cost prohibitive. Like the whole idea of using data is not new, right? Like we've talked about the enterprise data warehouse for many, many years. I think the scale and speed at with which data has grown and the capabilities of the cloud uniquely offer a different experience in terms of the insights that you can derive from data as a business user in order to make decisions really about the business. So that's the key there. Okay. Brian, you mentioned before that you were on-premise, that you transitioned to Google Cloud Platform, and that you also have used Amazon Web Services.
For a long time.
Maybe you can share a little bit about that journey with the audience and what you took, like what were the pluses and minuses of each?
Yeah, happy to. So, we started on-prem because that's all it was, 15 years ago. We started the company, effectively all it was. And that was really the only way enterprises were buying, certainly technology back then. But we realized over time that, actually our customers asked us that they wanted us to manage the platform for them. They wanted us to in some cases, take ownership of the capital expenditure. And so we had a client that just did a simple shift of running our on-prem platform in AWS at the time. And so we started to do that for our clients, and we offered it as this pretend as a service offering. And it was an interesting way to get started. It was an interesting way to learn a lot. And then we watched our customer base grow slowly with that platform as the cloud became, it actually exactly paralleled the adoption of public cloud in the enterprise. And, really at this point, about 3 years ago now, 36 months, I'd say, the enterprise really flipped over and there was wide scale acceptance that a hyperscale public cloud can run it more efficiently, can provide better security, and ultimately give a better as-a-service type experience to infrastructure. Why am I trying to do this? And so most today technology, there's about every CIO or VP of infrastructure operations acknowledges that. And if there are still plenty of corporations that can't because of regulations, the utility clients are some of the ones that are the most on-prem and will be for a long time. But the world then moves faster and faster in this as-a-service offering, and we realized that we started hitting limitations with AWS primarily on the business side first, and then secondarily the infrastructure side. And as we started to think about true multi-tenant SaaS, our evaluation of the market was there was clearly head and shoulders better capability in Google Cloud. And so we actually built our true multi-tenant platform SaaS first using GKE on Google Cloud and have been thrilled with it. But along those lines, I think something that's really important for the enterprise is the partnership. And this is an area you probably have heard in the media, AWS tends to be they don't understand the enterprise really, is at least how to do business with the enterprise, and certainly how to partner. And that's one of the big differences that we've seen with Google, their ability to support us, provide us the information that we need technically, in some cases the go-to-market support, in our case as a software seller, but I think that translates very quick also over into enterprise customers as well. And so today we're solely on GCP and thrilled, but and it's cool to kind of look back and say I've got these levels of experience that I can draw from, and we can touch base every once in a while and see and realize that not a whole lot's changed, and so we're excited, particularly where GCP goes forward now. Leadership in ML, the Kubernetes side clearly is something that is very, very important to us. And then furthermore, looking at a lot of the data type products. Data Studio we've done a lot with that more recently, been very excited about that. And then BigQuery and BigTable as just kind of some core platforms that we've leveraged internally. And it's funny now as a software provider selling to the enterprise, I sit down with these leaders and I'm able to share with them maybe creative ways to take advantage of those services internally, the enterprise, and get away from just pure infrastructure and actually think about things in terms of servers, serverless and services, and much less just plain IaaS.
Thank you. Actually, you led me right to my next question, which was going to be for you, Lyle. When you mentioned that you were an early App Engine user, App Engine was truly probably our first managed service, right? And I think it would be helpful for, particularly for the business users in the audience, to really understand what is the difference between just running infrastructure and IaaS and what serverless and managed services can provide and offer to companies, and how would you characterize the difference between the two and then the benefits of one versus the other?
Sure, so it really boils down to, for an engineering team, there's always a trade-off between portability, ease of use. That's usually the biggest case. So as we're looking at multi-deployment, going across cloud, let's say, or a hybrid environment between on-premise and on-cloud, the further into an application structure that you go within one of the providers, the more lock-in you have. That's the primary biggest concern as you look at some of these places. At the same time, it frees up your resources to focus on the unique part of your product and not worry about infrastructure. So when I started my first company in '99, you wanted to have a database server, you pretty much had a full-time person running that. Now there's 3 or 4 offerings in GCP, and all the providers actually, that abstract that away so you only need developers. So if I look at something like BigTable, we want to store a lot of data, we want to have it in a horizontally scaling environment across every data cloud center in the world. We can do that with Google without thinking about it. Where before it used to be, you had a guy in a badly fitting t-shirt like mine running into a room and changing a server hard drive when it fails. So if you think about that gain, that's the real gain.
Yeah, so maybe we can build on that a little bit, Ryan, with obviously using IaaS, you're still getting the benefit of not running into the room. But there are some knobs that you're responsible for. And maybe you can share a little bit about what's the difference essentially between Kubernetes, which is a technology that we have open sourced that was really kind of the standard for containerizing things, and GKE, which Brian, you mentioned, and really how those two differ, because we see customers that run Kubernetes on Google Compute, which means they're not using the managed service, and then we have those that use GKE, which is the managed service. So would you share a little bit about that, just so that people understand the choice and trade-offs that they might be making?
Yeah, so when we did our evaluation on our side, we had my engineers set up. We started by looking at AWS, and they went to go set up their Kubernetes cluster, and we spent like a month. And one of the guys goes to a Google show and says, "Oh, GKE is neat," and they push a button, and suddenly they're playing with it, right? And it's basically that simple. The way I look at it today is, Lyle mentioned, getting a database. You've got a guy, running in to manage it, but before that, you've got to go to your finance guy to get the PO to buy the server, right? IaaS eliminates that step, right? It gets rid of the server, the finance purchase, and turns that CapEx into OpEx. But there's still an operating system that probably somebody's got to do something with and keep it up to date. And there's the technology on top of that, whatever it is that you're putting in place, that gets to be a trouble. And then on top of that, in complex, certainly enterprise applications, networking between these components inside IaaS is not trivial. And it ends up being like another type of networking technology stack that somebody's got to learn that's specific to the IaaS provider. We found that when you start getting into, particularly in the serverless world and GKE, it is, I learn how to interact with that service. It's there. I have an expectation of availability that's extremely high, and that's met, and it works. And we find that, and then you've got somebody behind you that's thinking about things like global scale, multi-region support, DR's baked in. If you're federal, it's FedRamped. I mean, it's just like you go down the checkboxes of stuff that I would normally have to spend a whole lot of money and, frankly, time, years, 18 months, focusing on developing, we don't get. So
Great, thank you. Do you have anything to add, Ryan?
Well, I do, because we were just having this conversation earlier today, actually, and I think it's interesting, and Lyle sort of mentioned this, which is like, he said, you don't need someone to run it. He's like, he actually, I think you quote said, you just need developers. And it's such an interesting concept, because, so what do companies do who have teams of operators, or what we might call DevOps nowadays, but people that are focused on the running, and what does it mean for their jobs when people are saying, well, we just need developers? There's so much focus on the developer. And so I think what Kubernetes and GKE are really doing are, I think if you had developers go their own route, they would just want to deploy in something like App Engine, who probably don't care. What Kubernetes has really done that's interesting is it's pulled the operator, right, that employee and their career, right, into the cloud. And it's changed the way that we think about running infrastructure. That gives the developers, in theory, what they want, like this easy deployment model and scaling and all of that stuff. But it's evolving the operator job and changing it into something that's not system focused, but more service focused.
The way that I like to highlight it is that system admins, now DevOps, get to focus on things that are actually important to the core of the business. It isn't that they don't exist anymore, it's they don't have to worry about patching systems and doing a bunch of low-level work that is pretty rote, right? Let's have people work on things that are really important and unique to a business.
Or maybe another way to think of it is we get more efficiency out of a single operator, right? Where before I may have had one for every 100 machines or whatever, and now in theory, if you're someone like Google, I don't remember the ratio. I think we've talked about it publicly, but the number of people who are focused on the infrastructure for the sheer number of machines and application running is just, that ratio is just immense. And so especially for startups, that's important, right, for cost reasons, and even for enterprises to provide their developers and that new experience, but not completely sort of count out the.
I mean, specific examples. So our operations team were generally, lower level IT guys, kind of have grown up. We turned that into a legit SRE team about 3 months ago. And granted, competitively, I have to pay them a little bit more, but just with the SRE title, because they get called by the headhunters. But the difference is I had IT guys that kind of said, well, I'm not sure, where do I go? Where now suddenly I'm latched onto the hottest thing on the planet. And so their job satisfaction shot through the roof, right? They're much more indebted. The fact that we created that, now they have a path to the cloud, like you were talking about. And so their loyalty goes up. So we're retaining them better as a result. And what I get out of them from, just a sheer, the availability of the platform increases, and so it's worth any extra that I pay them. So it's a cool culture shift.
Yeah, I think so. Curious, because one of the things that I think big enterprises and big IT shops have as a concern is, how do I transition my people? Can you talk a little bit more about, one, the training that you may have gone through to kind of help them up-level their skills, and then two, what kind of resistance did you have from them as you started to think about moving from on-prem to the cloud, and how did you get over that?
So those are two good questions. The training bit's pretty straightforward. The Google offers a very rich portfolio of classes, and then your partners do as well. And it's cool to kind of see that go through. What I find is that the types of IT staff that I want to keep are naturally curious anyway, and so they typically suck this stuff up like there's no tomorrow. And it is super cool to be involved with the cloud, and so it has been. They have readily accepted it. It's readily available, and it's very effective. So from that standpoint, it's worked out really well. But your question around kind of resistance, very little resistance, frankly, from the team once they realized that the company had a commitment. I think a commitment to SaaS. The pivot to SaaS or the adoption of SaaS or the adoption of cloud, my belief is the culture change is actually the very hardest part of that. The technology is the part that you can look, you can map out, you can study, you can lay out a roadmap, you can decide how you're going to get there, and and set a goal of kind of what time frame you want to do it. The culture shift is a whole lot harder, and it changed the way that you think and the way when you are truly going to from a waterfall type delivery, or even if you're agile in the past, releasing on some kind of cadence to continuous delivery. That is a major change from every level of the organization, from marketing, sales, from IT, from the executive team. Everybody has to kind of rethink their job, and that is the piece that, frankly, we underestimated when we did our change. And so it's less of resistance of the IT team, and not, I wouldn't say resistance of the company,
Right.
but just like, wow, this is a big chunk of cheese we're moving.
Yeah. So in case, I'll try to do a little bit of a translation. CI/CD is essentially a constant release process, whereas in the past, for those traditional IT or development approaches would essentially be stuck waiting on the slowest developer, is probably the best way to put it. Whereas in the CI/CD world, an individual can essentially push as soon as they're ready, right? And so you don't slow down the momentum of the organization. You're not held back by that least common denominator. So you're right, it's a huge change management effort because it actually affects your product, it affects your customers, it affects everything. So yeah, change management is certainly not to be underestimated.
I was going to add, just on that point, just from my personal experiences in the companies I've worked with, is I found that, like, actually, you're correct, right? The developers know what they want. The operators have, I think, accepted the path of the new world, and even to a degree, the networking administrators are fine with it. The one that I still see is that I don't want to say a blocker, but maybe not focused on is the security teams. And so if you're going to go back to your company and you say you want to adopt Kubernetes, or we've been talking about Kubernetes a lot, or maybe just cloud in general, I still feel like security. Not to talk about security models, but the security teams up-leveling their game, or how their job changes in this world, I think has been the one thing that everybody is missing the boat on. In the sense that, like, the providers, I don't think we do a good enough job of interacting with security teams soon enough. And so if you are looking at Google or Amazon or Kubernetes, my suggestion would be bring them in early, bring them in often. And we can change the way that they work as well, provide better security models.
Great. Okay, I'm going to completely switch gears. We were having a conversation earlier about diversity in tech and how it's a tough subject. You want to? I'm not going to ask you a very specific question. I'll let you share any thoughts that you might want to for the audience.
Sure. So it's definitely a challenging subject. As a startup founder, I do have a belief that it actually starts a little bit more fundamentally earlier than companies think that it should. Obviously, early hires are really important, and how you build your company structure will resonate for the next 500 hires you make. But in this case, we actually thesised that if we wanted to have a diverse team, we had to start at the fundamentals. So all of our capital so far in has either been female-led or female majority, as well as diverse background at a greater than 50% rate. So I think that has been a really fundamental improvement to our structure. It's not something we advertise because I don't think that's the important part of it, but we want to have are comfortable paying attention to how well we're doing on this subject and moving ourselves forward.
And why, maybe we can talk a little bit about why we think it's important. Go ahead.
So fundamentally, from IBM on, there's been a lot of pretty impressive research done that diverse teams perform better. Even in the area that we're in, code review, the more diverse your review team for reviewing code, the better the output. So
Yeah.
it's just
Because essentially there are biases that are built in based on whoever is building whatever product, right?
Absolutely.
Inherent bias. So, yeah. So, Brian, maybe you can speak a little bit to it. Like when you already have a team, then what do you do?
You focus hard on it. I mean, because you've got to. I will say.
That's meaning you didn't build from the ground
Right.
up with those principles in mind.
And I think as well, what's happened is with whether you realize it or not through that group think thing, you've actually built walls, right? And you're gonna talk about. We talk about it in our board meetings, and you can very easily find yourself talking to diversity and taking very little action,
Yes.
right? And so the bias has to be towards action and being very deliberate. With kind of driving diversity in your organization, and I love what you said about starting with capital, because that's a great example of applying diversity thinking in non-traditional ways. Like I think most people wouldn't think like that. That's clearly the voice of experience, and what we find ourselves, we haven't been smart enough to do that. So congratulations. But what we do is, in every single activity, any area that we're looking to expand or change. It ends up being a part of the discussion, right? And so we're not as far along the path probably as you are from that standpoint of like indoctrinating that thought. But so as a result of that, we constantly have, it's an effort, it's a muscle that we constantly have to work on and develop.
Great. I want to also make room for the audience to ask questions. So I don't know if did we get a handheld? Does anyone have questions in the audience? Yay, we have one. You might have to project. Oh wait, here. Okay, wonderful.
So I love G Suite. I've been on it forever with my company and several companies. It's a bit, the thing that is sometimes crazy is that there's so much opportunity within the space with all the apps and the additions and the things within Drive, right? So I have a two-part question. Like, how does one not spend their entire life figuring out which apps are best for them to install into Drive, right? Because it's overwhelming how much.
Yes.
Great, and it's great. Second is I find that it's been sometimes frustrating because I'll have an individual on the advertising side who will be like, oh, I'm going to take yes because I'm going to get your money on this, but then not as much on the actual help of the organization on the IT side within cloud. So my question is two-part, how do you deal, is there ever a world in which you actually can have a personalized person who can help you sort of guide your business into this?
You mean from a Google perspective?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh boy, you're exposing our the ugliness of the organization. So so maybe I'll let one of you who are also G Suite users address the first part of the question in terms of how do you figure out which apps and capabilities to take advantage of without sinking too much time into it.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally in business, this is a problem across anything you'll do. So at some level, my recommendation is we have a needs framework where we go, how painful is something, both from cost and time. If it doesn't fall in the right quadrant for us, we don't look at it. That should be true of all of your cloud provisioning from GCP to something like you're using traditional suite. Don't add everything, that'll kill you. We've done that in the past in previous companies where we try every service release that comes out, and then you have a whole bunch of things that don't work. So really, I believe in small choices, deep convictions.
My perspective on this would be the ad side of Google is a very different business, right? It's very mature. It scales in a different way. Cloud side of Google is still relatively young, or at least comparatively young, and we are trying to get out in the market in a different way. And so we're trying to be much more present, right? We're building up a very large sales force. And so at least on the GCP and G Suite side, I would say that those questions, like there's somebody at Google that you can talk to about those questions very explicitly. And then they can connect you to someone on the ad side, like if you needed to. And so I guess my point there is don't be afraid to try to contact someone in the cloud space at Google, because they're like our team is growing rapidly, and there's a lot of us now.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, just to strategically answer your question, I don't see a world where they converge, if that's what you're asking. I think that on the ad side of the business, there is a point leader who essentially goes across, because there's many different products even on that side, right? With the DoubleClick platform, mobile, like there are specialists all over the place, but there is your single ads person that typically owns that relationship. We have the same thing on the cloud side. We do try to work together, particularly where there's overlap in terms of joint business planning, but I think it would probably be too big and two really different worlds. Yeah. Like the audience on the ad side is very much the marketer, where our audience definitely crosses business and IT, but it is on the business side a lot more from an operator perspective, CFO perspective, and a CMO, because they actually are owning data much more, but not one-to-one. There's not always a match, and we do work often with IT.
Yeah. It'll probably be the thing that'll get you to number one, is that sort of personalized.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're on it.
All right. Any other audience questions? I see one hand here, and I'll come to you. Okay.
First of all,
Please introduce yourself too, if you want to.
Everyone, Billy Hightower, VMware Enterprise Sales Rep. So as of a week ago, actually moving to Amazon, AWS next.
Shame on you.
I've been doing it here in Texas and trying to convince oil and gas CIOs that the internet's not effective.
Are you here in Austin or are you Houston?
I'm
Or-
doing the opposite move. I'm moving to San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
AWS.
Okay.
sales in 2 weeks. So.
You should have come to us. Okay. Anyway.
More in the enterprise space, for large enterprises, so much of it is in the strategy line by your large CISOs, like your Deloittes and your Accentures. How does Google position itself with those major CISOs as the platform of choice?
You mean really the global SIs?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah. So I think that our ecosystem strategy is much more mature on the G Suite side, to be honest. And that's just the maturity of the business, having been around for a bit longer. On the GCP side, we have work to do there. We have strategic partnerships with about 4 of the major global GSIs, but quite frankly, what I tend to find, having been in this business for over 25 years, is that the consultancies that make money off of practices tend to build and invest more in the practices, the more prolific the platform becomes. And so what we try to do is take a balanced view between the regional SIs or the niche SIs who have expertise in a particular area, whether it's data, ML, infrastructure, migrations, whatever it is. And then the GSIs who tend to be much more all-encompassing. Those are like the ones that we're working with on things like SAP migrations to GCP. So I think for us, it typically comes down to focus. I think it's hard to boil the ocean and do everything and do it all well. So we tend to try to pick strategically where we're going to make those investments. Sometimes those directions change year to year, depending on who our leaders are. But I think right now the direction is really to double down on the 4 GSIs that we have been partnering with over the last year, really focus on SAP migrations there, and then the regional SIs, there's about 25 worldwide that we're focused on.
I'm curious, Brian, as you guys adopted or you changed your whole business and built a whole new set of tooling and software, how did you guys think about GSIs versus hiring in-house versus owning it? I'm curious what that looked like.
We did it ourselves, and we leveraged GSIs and from a go-to-market standpoint with our platform. So we've actually spent more time with the GSIs, a few, three in particular, to bring our platform to them and kind of help understand kind of what's our value proposition as a platform that they can sell to the enterprise. And then that's led to some introductions back with the Google team. But we actually, we chose to do it ourselves, which one could argue is a little bit of the harder way, but we tend to be a bit more an organic, do it in-house shop anyway. So that's kind of fit who we are.
Okay.
Great. I know there was a question here in the front.
My name is Kelsey Davis. I'm a student at Syracuse University, and I have a startup called Collective. So actually, a few months ago, we won a pitch competition at Google in New York City.
Wonderful.
Thank you. And we were awarded Google Cloud money
Mm-hmm.
in order to essentially start running our platform through Google Cloud.
Yep.
So we actually just released our beta last week, and so now we're in the position of figuring out, okay, we think this is the right time to start tapping into Google Cloud's services and figuring out how we can utilize their platform to increase the efficiency of what we're doing from an operation side of things.
Yep.
What would be, I guess, your tip or your advice in terms of like getting plugged into that community? We are between upstate New York and New York City, and we're just really interested in more of like a accelerator approach or a very like close one-on-one relationship with Google representatives to help us build as we scale over the next year. And we only have that until the end of the year.
So you got to move fast.
Yeah.
So what does your platform do? Collectives.
Collective. So what we do, we're a creative agency that actually develops creatives who are in college and then places them with brands for like different art brand partners. And so some of our brands we work with Coca-Cola, Land Rover, Glamour, a lot of brands at Condé Nast. And so while that's all great, we're figuring out the best ways to scale that activity. So for example, some things that we need are better ways to streamline the creative production process when we have all of these creatives and we're matching them with brands. Obviously on the other side, like the actual matching process between taking something like a Fiverr or Upwork, but essentially having a lot more exclusive community that exists on college campuses. So we have students who are localized on the ground that we can tap into, say, University of Texas at Austin. If we have 3 videographers who are here, and then Capital Factory, needs a video for this event, being able to use our service and our platform to make that connection happen between any of our schools. And so while we're able to do that from like a manual level now, and that's what we've been doing over the past 2 years, we're trying to figure out how to bring that all online.
Yep.
So another capability in that would be like matching, right, between brands and the creatives.
Kind of like the Uber for the creative world.
So being able to creatives, I don't know, like if there's a way, for example, for us to get data on their capabilities, get data on the specific needs from the brands, and then like build matching or like recommend it. Like I'm a film major, so even though like create this company, we have all of that infrastructure, I am less informed on the technical side of things.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about the startup program and the community, that the first part of the question, and then I would love to hear your thoughts just in terms of how do they go about getting the expertise they have the great idea, they're doing it, but how do they now build a digital platform?
To give you maybe too much of a tactical answer, and we can talk after this, but if you're part of the startup program, you certainly have a contact at Google that you could reach out to, who then could introduce, Google's got a couple different investment arms, and so who then could potentially introduce you to them or talk to you about the startup, like where you're at now versus in the future, and like where you want to be. You guys have a contact, and if you don't, somebody at your org should know who they are, and if not, I can help figure that out. I'll give you my email address and I can help you figure that out. And then they can also connect you in with the other venture arms. That's a tactical answer, and we can talk about it afterwards.
But there are communities and like that we sponsor in different locations that bring different accelerator and startups together, like working space to the tech to everything. Lyle, anything?
All of that is, just to make sure, all of that is included, like by being a company within the Google Cloud for Startups, like service. Okay.
Let me ask, do you have a technical co-founder?
Excuse me?
Do you have a technical co-founder?
I do not.
Okay. So what I would recommend personally would be to apply to a number of accelerators. You'll help your chances by finding someone technical to partner with you. Some of what you're asking for is probably out of the scope of what they can help you with, particularly around creating some of these business processes around matching, that kind of thing. That being said, that is what a lot of great accelerators do. There's Y Combinator, who we went through, but Techstars, 500 Startups, Capital Factory, lots of them all over, and they'll help you refine that process as you go towards demo day and actually solve some of those higher order problems.
Yeah, but I think what you would want to tell them is that if you have, you won this contest and you've got the credits, you actually want someone that has GCP skills too. Great. Anyone else? I don't know, how are we doing on time?
Let me see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Vicki Evans.
10 minutes.
Based here in Austin with a company called Red Cape, and we're focused on end user training. So I understand the pain of end user adoption, moving from on-premise to cloud. So I'm curious, you underestimated the resistance. What's the cost of underestimating that? And not necessarily financial, but loss of productivity, whatever, or how long it took for the adoption to take place. What worked during the transition for the business users? And then any suggestions for anyone else making that transition?
Yeah. So the Jeffrey Moore's more recent book, I forget the name of it right now, but it's much more recent than Crossing the Chasm, but he does this 2x2 matrix. It talks about kind of innovation on one side and investment on the other, and kind of talks about kind of how you go through these types of pivots, and kind of like, and basically how committed are you is the way I summarize what it is. And the mistake that you make is that you end up not kind of trying to do both things at once. I'm gonna keep my old because I know that and I love that, and I'm gonna hang on to it. But I'm gonna dabble in the new a little bit. You think Kodak back in the day, right? I've got my digital camera, but we're gonna stick with film for a long time because that's where I make my money. And what you end up doing is screwing it all up. And so the biggest price you can pay is run yourself out of business if you don't fully commit. The price you pay is time and how fast you get to the new, and that can be very impactful. The way that for us, the piece that in hindsight, in full transparency, we should have better understood the impact to our business model, and looked probably additionally realistically for additional funding to get us through, just to cover in the eventuality of anything getting weird on the revenue charts, right? You want to keep everything up and to the right at all times. Life isn't like that, and so and these types of pivots are long-term existential type transitions that you're doing, and so you've got to have your investors along with you, which we did, but we probably didn't go all the way. From a staff perspective, what that does is it creates uncertainty. Right? Everybody suddenly sits there and goes, I don't understand. I thought we were doing this pivot, and I thought it was going to go great, and life was going to be roses, and Nirvana is right there, and you end up, the path is a little more challenging. It's the messy middle, which is also talked about a lot. So, I mean, those are kind of big fuzzy answers. The maybe more specific, the cost can be attrition of staff, of key people, right? So you got to think that through. It can be in terms of customers. That surprised me though. One thing is, my most old school, I'm never going to change clients actually still very much understood the vision of what we're doing, and would say things to me like, I understand why you're doing it. It makes complete sense. I wish I could go with you, but I can't. I'm going to stay on this on-prem product. And so they actually stay with us from an on-prem perspective while we invest just about everything else in this new product. So they were actually more understanding. But as you kind of go through, it still doesn't mean everything's perfect. So it really is, making sure you got the funding to get through, the revenue, whether it's a business case or a business unit inside a larger company or your entire company, making sure your employees understand the why behind the ride that they're going to be in, and that they're in with you, and then know that you're going to lose some of both along the way, no matter what, and be prepared for that.
I think I could echo the whole the dabble, like don't dabble, which is that customers I've worked with who dabble in cloud, either never adopt it for a number of reasons. Like, you really need something with some gravity, right? To pull the other teams, because nothing exists in a silo, right? And so to pull all these other teams in with you, and then part of that is going to be like training, right? Not just the developers, right? This is what we talked about. Not just the developers, not just the operators, but also training the security teams, the networking teams, the BI team. I mean, it touches the whole business. So dabbling doesn't work.
Yeah, but that's not to say that, I mean, what we tend to see is that there are many different use cases, and identifying one that is high value, but maybe not high risk to make the move first and to kind of test it, I think is
Yeah,
key,
yeah, yeah.
as opposed to trying again to boil the ocean. There was a question back here?
Sure. So I work in a radio company, and we have like our tech division, and I work with basically the senior people to me are all very strong people who believe in like on-premises servers that they physically can see and touch. And so it's like kind of this generational conflict for me trying to have the cloud, and then trying to say like, no, well it's much cheaper to be on-premises. The cloud is too expensive. So I would love to hear like what experiences you had from customers like that had a very on-premises, they own their hardware, like any kind of, did you actually end up reducing costs or improving this? Like, I'm just curious to hear like what it's like for people who didn't start already in the cloud, but actually
Yeah.
migrate from on-premises
Yeah.
to the cloud.
I mean, generally, I would say that the business case is extremely strong for cloud. I don't know, Brian, if your experience.
It's cut and dry. It's 1 to 2 nines of availability right off the bat if you do it right, which is, it can be very expensive to get somebody to cost out or on-prem. And then, looking at the OpEx model, everybody freaks out about the costs, but there's a ton of tools out there that can help predict whether you're using, native Google tools or third-party tools that aren't affiliated. Some people like to do that too. And they work extremely well. I get an email every day, tells me exactly what this month we're going to spend, and I make 3-year commitments to Google based on that have been awesome. So
Yeah.
I save money and I get better availability.
Yeah, I think just in general, it's very easy to kind of shape a business case in a non-apples to apples comparison. You'll see things that are missing in terms of comparison. And so when you're looking just line item by line item, particularly like we talked about earlier with the managed service, like all the things that frees up, how do you quantify that? And like you'll have an infrastructure, a server hugger, can I say that doesn't want to give it up, and like they're not actually thinking about the benefits of those. So, I think making sure that there's a business case that really looks apples to apples. I don't think I can think of one customer who hasn't saved money.
Well, and you're in radio, so your peak provisioning is going to be quite deep, right? So from right there, there's optimizations to be made by having assets not served by your own hardware, using real CDN and then deployment. I can't see how you wouldn't save money.
Yeah,
in that
but I
case.
do think that it's important to not just focus on the savings element. Like you have to actually really focus on what this allows the business to do that you're not able to do today. So going back to my data warehousing example, not a new deal. I mean, everybody's done it. And it's like, if you go to a traditional enterprise, I'll go and have a conversation and it'll be, oh, we have a 40 terabyte data warehouse. And by the way, I worked for Oracle at the time that we had the first terabyte data warehouse. And I'm like, wow, we're talking about petaflops with some companies, right? Like just like the difference in order of magnitude when you get to a more digital native, they're like, we produce 30 terabytes of data a day, right? And you just never had the capability of dealing with that at scale. So if you are with an old enterprise, what that actually offers you is the ability to scale and bring in sources that you've never been able to because it was cost prohibitive in the past. So I think, to bring people along, you do need to make sure that you're doing the financial comparison apples to apples, and I would be hard pressed to see a case where it doesn't work favorably from an economics perspective. And then really anchor more on what's possible that's not possible today with the move. Last question, I think.
Yeah, I think we're.
My name's Drew Hill. I'm from the Bay Area.
Hi, Drew.
With a startup called Share, and what we do is take low-cost sensor data from environmental sensors and incorporate them with modeling techniques to produce actionable data, tell you where air pollution is coming from, so you can.
Do you know Breezometer?
Yes, they're one of our main
Big competitors? Yes.
Yeah,
They
we've
run
seen
on
their-
Google Cloud, that's
we've
why.
seen their, anyway.
Sorry.
You guys have an expose on your website.
Oh, okay.
So thanks for bringing that.
Yeah, no, sorry. I just asked because the founder just emailed me. I know him from traveling to Tel Aviv and meeting him there. So, okay, but you're starting something?
Yeah, so we're currently on AWS and we're switching to cloud, or Google Cloud, sorry.
Yay.
Yeah.
I'll advertise you too.
I'll hold you to it. But we're one how
In
to
the
set up our
migration?
architecture.
Oh.
Sorry?
I didn't know if you meant from a migration standpoint, but you're talking about architecturally?
No, I mean, we're basically going to start from the ground up. We're early enough that we can just rewrite all of our current code to
Okay.
shift to cloud and work
Yeah.
in Google Cloud. But I know we don't have time now, but are there
Let's-
good resources for technical?
Why don't you guys talk about it from a customer perspective, and then I think we can meet with you afterwards just to direct you appropriately. Do you have any advice?
We plan to scale quite a bit, and that's what we want to be able to do.
Okay.
I recommend containerization as a first order function. Look at the deeper platform as a service offerings they have. So various database solutions, integrating those early will help you scale quickly.
Yeah, and I would add the Google resources to help with that. You guys offered more than we consumed, right? From an architectural standpoint, reviewing our architecture of the platform and like getting into the ISV platform is where we plug in, and we were overwhelmed and the training on the SRE side as well, all pieces that led to greatness.
Great.
They email me weekly, trying to get me to talk to them.
All right.
We can talk after this. I
okay.
would just say if you're going to be in the startup program, we have people obviously in San Francisco that can help with these architectural discussions. Because the way GCP looks is not like AWS. There are differences, and the world does not need to look like AWS or Azure, and there are some core differences that you can really take advantage of to build on top of what Google has already built, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, guys. We
Yes.
really appreciate it. I hope it was useful, and thanks for coming. Have a
Yes.
good time in
Thank you.
Austin.